Richard Charkin is a British publishing executive. He's held senior positions at Pergamon Press, Oxford University Press, read Elsevier. He is the former chief executive of Macmillan and former executive director at Holtzbrinck, as well as serving terms as president of the International Publishers Association. He's now reached the pinnacle of his career. He's on top as founder of Mensch Publishing. Richard, welcome to the Bibliophile again.
Well, nice to be back. Nice to be alive, frankly, after 2 years of pandemic.
Tell me a bit about Mensch. How's that going?
Well, first of all, oh no, I can't do this. I was going to show you, but that won't appear on the audio, nonetheless.
It's your logo?
Yeah.
Right. And it's you juggling books.
It's me juggling the books, yeah. It was created by a very, very old friend of mine, a designer called Roger Law, who really made his name as the creator of a TV series called Spitting Image.
Yes.
Lampooned the British government and various other things. And indeed, there's a new series right now. And I'm wondering whether I can turn that into an NFT and make a lot of it. I doubt it. It'll be interesting to find out.
Yeah.
So Mensch Publishing, I set it up as I stepped down from the board of Bloomsbury Publishing, which is a British public company on the main London Stock Exchange. And I was 70 and thought, it's time to move on. But I thought I might get very bored. And I also had a few points to prove about publishing. So I set up Mensch Publishing with no staff, no strategy, no editorial ideas, no marketplace, but wanting to set an example, if you like, by serving authors first.
But what about the huge amount of money that you have, Richard?
Oh, the huge amount of money, yeah. I put in, this is commercially extremely sensitive, but I'll share it with you and your audience. I transferred £10,000, which at the time was about $15,000 and is probably only about $12,000 today after we've decimated our economy. Nonetheless, I transferred £10,000 into an account and then proceeded to invest in various books and get income from those books as well. And as of today, it stands at about, I think, £53,000. It is slightly cheating in that I get income from other sources, a bit of consultancy here and a bit of this there, which I run through Mensch Publishing. So it's not all about the sales of the books, but it is largely. So we're ahead of the game. We've published, I'm looking, I think, around 12 titles in 2 years, or maybe 14. We haven't lost money. When I say we, I mean I have not lost money on any, but we haven't made money on many either. So the purpose was not to make a lot of money. The purpose was to serve authors. And the authors I'm serving are the ones I want to serve. There is no particular logic. They're people I want to work with, I'm happy to work with, and I hope they're happy to work with me. And then in the process of doing it, I discover all sorts of nonsenses, which I share with the industry from time to time, for good or for bad. So I'm a sort of experiment, a living experiment in publishing.
That's why you're here today, Richard.
Yeah, well, anyway, here I am. And the books are great. And what one's doing is to build a backlist from nothing. Because in the end, actually, if you took a parallel with the music industry, there was the music industry, and now I see Bob Dylan selling for this, then Van Morrison selling for that, etc. It is because their backlist has found life through the internet. Now, books sometimes find life through the internet, but actually just have life, because if they're any good, they will last, and people will go on buying them for a long time. So I'm less obsessed by launching books rather than sticking with them And I'm forced to do that to some extent, but by my own internal rules. And the internal rules relate to the legal contractual relationship with the author. I do not pay advances against royalties. I only publish books where I have world rights, all languages. None of this UK and Europe, excluding the Isle of Wight on Thursdays, and maybe India and maybe not. It's always world. I pay decent royalties based on my income. Legally, I pay them twice a year, but actually I pay them 4 times a year. Every time I get a remittance from my distributor, which is quarterly, I hand the money over to their share to the authors, same day. Any rights income I get, as soon as the money hits my bank account, I split it with the author, same day. So that's my model. And it forces me to do things efficiently. It also forces me to remind myself every quarter, because I'm also, not only am I the founder, managing director, marketing director, publishing director, royalties manager. And when I have to calculate the royalties and send money. Well, that reminds me about the author. I can't forget the author, because there I am 4 times a year writing the letter saying, here's your dosh, or sorry, there isn't much dosh, or aren't we lucky, or whatever. And a million years ago, when I first started signing royalty checks, I think it was probably when I was at Oxford University Press, if I came across an author, and there were thousands of checks, if I ever came across an author I knew, I would write a little scribbled postcard and put it in with the check. That seemed to me a really important thing to do. That they are dealing with a human being, not a computer. So whenever I send a royalty statement or a check, I don't do checks, internet banking, I write an email to the author, short, saying, here it is, this is your money, sorry it's more, this is why it is what it is, etc. It's very important to keep your head on, your mind on the author's book way after publication.
Okay, so what's the most important lesson you've learned so far? That one?
That's a lesson. I suppose the other lesson, I sort of knew it, but you have to live it, is the attention to detail. Every little thing that can go wrong will go wrong. Sod's law, we call it. And it happens all the time, and it's all the tiny stuff that matters. I think the other lesson, and this is for other publishers to address, not me, is that publication of a book is a holistic experience. The publisher's job is to join all these dots, make sure that the bookshops in England have got it and the ones in America, and that the metadata showing on Amazon is correct, that the serial rights are sold, that the publicity is happening, that the copy editing was done to a proper level, and the proofreading and all the rest of it. And my authors, in particular, and indeed others, come to me. Why isn't that? What is that? What? And of course, in a publishing house, everyone is in bunkers. They've got a very specific job to do. Rightly, it's a perfectly legitimate structure. But almost no one is in the position that I've found myself in, whether I wanted to be or not. So, and linking this to the pandemic, while people are working from home, as they have been, how do they learn about the totality of the process?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, to give you an example, take production. You have someone who oversees the typesetting and makes sure that the proofs go out. And then someone else who's in charge of placing the print run, manufacturing of the book itself. There's probably a third person who's responsible for the cover, the jacket. And then when you reprint, if you reprint 1,000 copies, it goes through one person. But if you only want 700, so it goes digital printing, it's a completely different person. So already we've got 5 people on something which I would have thought. So that's just one aspect. That's just production.
So what are you saying? You're saying that big publishers should have one person do all that stuff?
No, but I think, well, actually, one person should be able to take responsibility for all that stuff. And all the people reporting to that person should understand the totality, so they don't do something that screws everything else up, which happens from time to time, possibly frequently.
So better internal communication
and education.
And education, you
I
said.
don't think people are educated in the whole of the publishing process.
Okay.
And it's very hard to do it. It's quite complicated. And so this is not a criticism, but I think it would be if I was back in a corporate role, I think I would lift the role of education up the priority list.
Run someone through the entire process from start to finish before they embark on whatever they've been assigned to do.
Yeah, or in parallel with them working on something, but it needs input from senior people.
Yeah.
Frankly, not from HR departments, who are very good, but they are different functions.
Okay.
And they may look after training. I'm talking about education, which I think is a different thing.
Okay.
I've learned a few things.
Good. Well, I'm hoping to get educated today.
Gosh.
We're going to focus on an article that you wrote for Publishing Perspectives on January the 1st, 2022, called Improving Publishing by Measuring Things.
Yeah.
And you start off referencing your job at Harrow.
Yeah.
And what you said was that by the time you'd spent 2 years, you knew how to sell the rights. So what did you learn there?
Put this in context. This was a smallish family business in the middle of London. Everyone was in one building, including the warehouse and every other function. And because I was in charge of science publishing and no one else was in the least bit interested in science publishing, they were interested in fiction or children's books, but not science, I was left to do my own thing.
Yeah.
And doing my own thing did involve learning about printing, going to the Frankfurt Book Fair, selling rights.
And that's what I want to know about. I want to know what you learned.
What I learned? Well, I'll tell you a couple of things. That in publishing, you can make or not make money out of selling books, but the profitability of almost every publisher is related to the quality and quantity of the rights they have sold. You do specifically out of selling rights and selling books.
Right. So what did you do when you were there about rights? And
various stands and sold the French rights to some book and then the German rights to another, all that. We had a rights director, was a she, pointed me at Flammarion or wherever, and I would saunter over in my enthusiastic puppy dog way, aged 22 or 23.
a strapping young lad.
A strapping young lad with great enthusiasm to flog them something they probably didn't want, but we managed to sell a few. Learning was how to sell, but that
Right.
instinctive, I suppose. Some people are good sales. I'm not a particularly good salesperson, but I've got a technique.
You didn't just walk over to the booth, or did you? Is that how it worked?
Yeah, absolutely. That's
You just
how it used to work at Frankfurt. It's a lot harder now. You have to put time.
Yeah.
But back then it was much more amateur.
So you just walked over with your book and you said, "This is a great book, and I think this is why it'll sell in Italy."
Yeah, these are science books, so they do tend to translate better than some other sorts of books. They either said, "Go away," or they say, "Can we have an option?" I got very excited. I thought options were very good. Of course, most options don't come to anything, but nonetheless, an option. And then you send them a copy of the book, and then they think about it, and they either say yes or no. And then we have an argument about how much.
Okay. They would say, what? We would give you 10% of our revenues?
No, it would normally be on retail price, not on revenues. We'll pay you a royalty. Typically, they'd say 7.5% of published price, which we would share with the author 50-50. And you'd get advanced. You'd hope to get 1,000 francs, or no, probably one hopes 5,000 francs against a future royalty. But it wasn't just that. I mean, let me give you another example where I didn't go to Frankfurt. One of the very first books I was involved in was Isaac Asimov, the science fiction writer, created a book called Words of Science, published by a US publisher, and then wrote another book called More Words of Science, and we were offered the UK rights in these two books. I had the idea of creating just one book out of two. I got someone to interleave the two, so we had one alphabetical sequence called Words of Science by Isaac Asimov. I was very young, new. Obviously, no one could trust me with the costings. So there was a chap in finance. He did the costings and said, it works at 2 guineas, whatever price. I can't remember, printing 5,000 copies. Then came back to me a couple of weeks later saying, I made a terrible mistake. It won't work at 5,000 copies. You'll have to charge 4 guineas, and no one will pay 4 guineas for this book. So I went to the pub with an old colleague and told him my problem. He just moved to work for the biggest book club in the UK, Book Club Associates, the Literary Guild, in fact. And he said, tell you what, if I bought 10,000 copies, would that make it work? And I said, yes, not knowing whether it would or not, but hoping it would. And we did the deal over a pint of beer. He took the 10,000 copies. The book was reprinted many times and made money. And it was all to a rights deal, effectively, selling the book club rights. And it was a good lesson. Also, the lesson was about relationships. If I hadn't gone for a beer with the guy, we'd have never done it.
Right. You said that you worked out how to cost books. How do you cost books?
Well, there are two principal ways. One is to establish whether the book will make a profit, and the other is to establish whether the book will generate cash. The two things are different. The book costs, who's going to be listening to this incidentally? Anyone?
No one, no, don't worry.
It's just so you know, it's a bit simplistic, really.
Yeah, I don't want simplistic. I don't want to talk down to the audience.
Okay, how do you cost a book? It's a very good question. There are two sort of ways. One is to start with the price you can charge for the book and work backwards. And the other is to start with how much it's cost you and work forwards to what you've got to charge. Clearly, there's no point putting a price on a book that no one's going to pay. So one should start with the price, and the price relates to the market, how much they're willing to pay, and then work back to the costs. Now, the problem is the costs are frequently already sunk. Can't do much about it. So then the temptation is to print enough copies to make the unit cost of the book such that the price works. This is the road to complete disaster, because unsold copies are unsold copies. Printing books, ruining virgin paper for the sake of a notional profit margin is really hopeless. But people do it, and they still do it today. The alternative way, which is the one I tend to look at, is just about cash. I think we can sell 1,000 copies at £20 each. That will generate so much cash, and I don't want to print more than that 1,000 copies. I don't want to have anything sitting in my warehouse in year 2. How much is that going to cost? How much advance have I paid out? Well, that's all gone, that's sunk, and you hope. You can't make it generate cash, because it can't. It can only generate cash if people buy the book. But it gives you a more realistic review of your financial position. The percentages of profit which people work to are pure fantasies. Cash is the only thing really that matters. So I would abolish all percentages. They don't mean anything.
As to get an idea of what you can charge, you go to the bookstore and you look for books of the same size, same category.
Yes, to some extent. you have to take into account the fact that you're looking backwards when you do that. Last year's book's not next year's book, so you have to think what it's going to be next year. Also, every book is different. We're a strange industry. Where we have bestsellers, we tend to keep the price down. And where we have not very good sellers, we tend to put the price up. This is the opposite of what happens in other industries, where you got a bestseller, that's the one you put the price up on because it's...
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
But, that's in our nature. We have these crazinesses.
Finally, you said about your time at Harrop, you learned how to generate ideas for books. And I just want to quote George Harrop.
Oh, there he is. Some memories, yeah. Before my time, he was...
Yeah, this is 1901 to 1935. And what he said in his chapter called Of the Mysteries of Publishing is that his friend Stanley Unwin, in his excellent book, The Truth About Publishing, in that book, the publisher is presented maybe as one who receives manuscripts, judges their merits, pays for their transformation into books, bears the cost of advertisement, and provides the machinery of distribution. The reader may overlook the fact that the publisher, worthy of the name, does more. He initiates and creates. Before the manuscript is begun, the book is often born in the brain of its publisher. He's tissing Stanley for ignoring that, and you actually learned that, apparently.
Yeah.
So how do you come up and generate an idea for a new...
I'll give you an example. Flora Thompson was, I think, a Victorian writer who wrote about a village somewhere in the country called Lark Rise. She wrote 3 volumes. One was called Lark Rise, the last one was called Candleford, and I can't remember what the one in the middle was called. But someone had the idea of creating an omnibus, Lark Rise to Candleford, beautifully illustrated with watercolour stuff and beautifully packaged, which created out of nothing, a very old trilogy, an absolute bestseller, which sold hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands. That was a creative act. There's another good example, was a famous book called The Anatomy of Britain by a historian called Anthony Sampson, not really a historian, journalist, a general person, writer. And he was commissioned to come up with this thing, which was an anatomy of Britain. I've had an obsession in my mind. I'd love to do one called The Pathology of Britain, to take account of the nonsense that's right now. But there are many such examples. And publishing is not just about trade book publishing. You take educational publishing, that the publisher says, okay, there's going to be a new curriculum across the board for the 15-year-olds, and we are going to find biology, chemistry, physics, economics.
Right. You're saying then one of the ways to come up with new ideas is to look at what already been published many years ago and try and adapt it.
So that's one. But then there's the completely new, like The Anatomy of Britain.
How do you do that, Richard?
Well, here you are. Look, I'll give you an example which people can't see. It's called The Oxford Illustrated History of Britain. It was a book that did not exist. The editor, brilliant publisher called Ivan Asquith, came up with the idea that there was a general books market for a high-quality, one-volume history of Britain. And he went out and found Ken Morgan, the editor, who commissioned a chapter from each of a series of scholars. We got a book club deal of, I think, 70,000 copies to underpin it, which allowed us then to get lots of illustrations. Not only did this book sell, but it spawned a whole family. There's an Oxford Illustrated History of English Literature, an Oxford Illustrated History of, I can't remember, Europe, and so on and so forth. This is in a proactive rather than a reactive mode. The two are not exclusive. Everything is a combination of the two.
So the idea was, let's put pictures to text.
Well, and create the text, because you had to have a text that was at the right level for the market.
Right, but there'd already been histories, obviously. This
Yeah, but no, this is brand new history.
Right. But the idea was to put pictures to it, basically.
Well, no, it was also to commission short history. Each chapter was by a leading historian, and then you put pictures. That was a packaging issue.
Yeah.
Commissioning the book de novo. This was all new stuff.
Okay. Any other thoughts on how to come up with new ideas for books?
Well, every editorial meeting that's worth its salt, it is to come up with exactly those ideas, the sort of ideas. I'm sure right now there's a pile of publishers trying to work out what are the post-pandemic books that the world needs. And if they're any good, they'll pick some good subjects and some good authors to write them. And if they're not, they're not. Who knows?
Yeah. So you are saying pay attention to what's going on in the world.
Precisely.
What might go on.
Zeitgeist is, if you like.
Okay. So in your article, you actually referenced a previous article about measuring a publishing company's commercial value. And what you say is that what really matters is building up the publishing assets. What did you mean by that?
A publishing company has a number of assets, including the people who work for it. One hopes they're assets rather than liabilities. So I think they mainly are. But the things that are a bit more measurable are the brand. Penguin, for instance, has a brand with enormous value, helps sales enormously. Oxford has a super brand, particularly in the academic field, the educational field. So if you're building a brand, that's an asset. But that asset is dependent on the books that come out. Well, in my day anyway, now it's not so much. The real asset was sitting in filing cabinets somewhere in the basement, which contained the contracts with authors. Those are the real assets. And those are very hard to measure their value. But they are the most important thing you have. An example I give of how difficult it is. In 1987, I think, but I may need to check that, Bloomsbury, who were an adult trade hardback publisher, UK-based, signed a contract with J.K. Rowling for the publication of Harry Potter. That year, I don't know how well they were doing, but I would imagine normal, sort of just okay. But their value had suddenly increased from 1 to 1,000 by the act of signing Harry Potter. And yet we couldn't have measured it then. And that is still quite hard to measure.
Yeah.
But that was the value.
Having signed it, you had no idea exactly what the value was going to be.
No, but when you then value the business, I think the article in question was called "How Do We Measure Commercial Success in Publishing?" Frequently, commercial success, if you read the trade magazines, some so-and-so had a brilliant year, their sales were up 10%. Yeah, that's not really meaningful.
You talk about the fact that, copies sold, revenues generated, profits earned, cash in the bank.
They're important measures, but they're not the ultimate measure. The ultimate measure is how much more valuable at the end of the year was the company in terms of its intellectual property assets than at the beginning. It doesn't make a headline in the bookseller or Publishers Weekly, but it is the real thing. And the example I give in that article of Peter Rabbit.
I love that art. Here's what I pulled out of the bibliophile reference library. See that?
Hang on.
This is a lovely, lovely...
Beautiful. And it was all part of Frederick Warne, which was a family publisher, not dissimilar to Harrop. Similar thing. I think they published the I Spy books as well, which were reasonably successful, and a few other things. But it turns out that the only thing of real lasting value was Beatrix Potter. And its value was many, many, many times the price that Penguin paid to buy Frederick Warne. And it required a publisher to identify that. No amount of slide rule arithmetic would have told you that Beatrix Potter was going to be the thing that worked. It was a publisher's nose instinct.
Yeah, I think it's funny because this book I'm referring to is The House of Warne, 100 Years of Publishing. It was published in 1965. Beatrix Potter's beautiful illustrations are all over the cover and all throughout the book. It wasn't exactly a secret.
Oh.
What did you sniff out?
It was the merchandising.
Yes.
So the books were the books. They could be repackaged. But the merchandising, the teapots, the fluffy bunnies,
Well, and then more recently, the movie.
Absolutely. We have a similar one at Heinemann where we had done, when I worked there, with Thomas the Tank Engine. The rights, the merchandising rights to go to a third party for peanuts. And then Ringo Starr decided to do the voiceover. It became a hit everywhere, particularly from Japan and Germany, and I don't know why that would have. So
yes, now I mean that's all very good, but these days, I mean, there's a lot of rapacious agents that advise authors not to give up these kind of rights.
Yeah, but then you have to find a way around it, or you find the next Beatrix Potter who doesn't have an agent, or on Mensch Publishing, I assumed that no agent would deal with me because I pay no advances and I get all right. I've done with agents, and they've accepted these terms.
Right.
It could be because they couldn't sell them to anyone else. I'm sure that's part of the story, but not the whole story. If an author wants a publisher to really feel ownership of their work, then the more right publisher is responsible for, the more ownership that publisher will have and will work on it.
The harder they're going to work.
Yeah, it's an obligation. Yeah.
The January 1st article, you put forward an audit wish list, basically suggesting that if publishing houses measured these things that you're identifying, they'd make money?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, they make money, but serve their authors. You serve your authors, you'll make money, I think. My wish list opened with how long every individual in the business take to reply to an email from point of receipt.
Right.
I mean, why not within 10 minutes, half an hour?
Yeah.
It takes me at least 3 emails to get a response on average at all, let alone in 24 hours. Even if you don't have the answer to the question, a response is a proper business thing.
Yes, it's interesting, Richard. I think you're fighting against, again, we're talking about zeitgeists. I know my daughter's generation, it's like they don't do that. That's just not.
They better learn.
Is that us lecturing them or?
No, it's by doing an audit. If we actually start measuring how long an editor takes to respond to a proposal, then they'll start doing it. If you don't measure it, they never will. I mean, you could make this wish list as long or as short as you like. There's no magic in it. But asking the questions, here's one, which price points are truly hurdles? Let's measure, let's find out. You can't go above $20 for a paperback. Well, why not? How not? Let's try it. Let's measure it. If it makes a difference. Does the blurb matter? Well, I doubt it, but, more important, what proportion of authors is happy with the publication process? Interestingly, academic publishers ask their authors that sort of question all the time, measure it. General book publishers, by and large, don't.
How do you measure it? They say, I don't like it, so what do you do?
First of all, what don't you like? Which bit of the publication process wasn't any good? Was it the production? Was it the time it took? Was it the marketing? Was it the publicity? Was it your relationship with the editor? You drill down and you find out. You think, well, maybe they're right. Maybe we long. It took us 2 weeks to just answer a simple question: how quickly a supplier's paid. It's extraordinary to me. I'm learning from Mensch how hard it is to extract money out of people. Now, it's fine. It's their job to conserve their cash as long as possible. But actually, lose all the goodwill in the world by doing it. I don't think it's very productive.
Mm-hmm.
How long does it take to earn back advances paid? Here's another one. Well, interesting. You could do that by editor and see how really good someone is or is not. These are measurements.
Efficiency and time, and it reminded me of why Amazon is so damn good and making so much money. They get out the door really quickly, and they've got great customer support.
And they ask you what you think of the service, and you respond, and they can measure it, change their behavior, much as I occasionally fall out with them myself, obviously.
Right. So basically the idea is there's a lot of different facets of publishing that could be measured and improved upon.
Well, I tell you, if you read the trade press, just about every week, publishers come out with an audit. How diverse is their workforce? That's all fine. That's good. But in addition to that, or as well, how about putting as much energy into trying to improve your own performance on what you're really there for, which is to publish books for authors successfully? That's all I'm trying to say. A seat of the pants is fine. Judging whether a book is going to be a bestseller or not is a very difficult art, and you can't predict it. But where you can predict, where you can measure things, we should. The more we measure, the better we'll get, I think. Maybe it's because I was brought up in a sort of numerical rather than verbal background, my education. Maybe that's the difference. It's been quite interesting for me because I sort of pride myself on very unsophisticated mental arithmetic, which others seem to think is irrelevant. I think it's rather relevant.
Well, it's also your history with scientific journal publishing, right?
But it's numeracy. It's about everything.
Okay, so best advice then to the small publishing house based on your experience?
Don't do it.
No, we don't want that.
Look, you quoted earlier Stanley Unwin, or a quote about Stanley Unwin. I can't remember the exact quote, but goes something like, publishers do all sorts of things, and they have all sorts of obligations and responsibilities. But the single most important responsibility they have is to remain in business in order to be able to pay royalties to authors in the future. So when setting out on starting something, getting the commercial model right is really important, because to set something up because you want to publish some obscure something or other is fine as a hobby. But if you want to be a publisher, you've got to remain in business, otherwise you're not. And remaining in business does involve being commercial, making money, finding money where you can find it, hunting quality writers, hunting quality sales. So I don't know what my advice is, but don't go into it without a very clear idea of how you're going to manage commercially.
And you've just given up to possible ways of saving money or making more money in your article. So
yeah, the one dimension that we're not very good at, or at least I think this refers to general book publishers more than academic, is time, speed of decision making, speed of response, speed of publication. Too damn slow. And I include myself in it, and Mensch Publishing, although I think we're hell of a sight quicker than most of the big guys. How long does it take you to decide to publish? How long does it then take you to publish? How long does it take you to reward the author? Most of my audit things ultimately are about speed or decisiveness. The two go together.
Yeah.
So, not tomorrow.
Just finally, what you like the most then about the last couple of years?
Okay, one of the things I hate about the industry traditionally is those ghastly awards evenings where everyone gets up in black tie and turns up to a fairly dross hotel for fairly dross food and listening to boring videos and flashing lights and pretending we're at the Oscars and we're not. So I hate them. But I saw one of the awards this year is for the Small Publisher of the Year. And given that I have absolutely no chance of winning that award, I wrote a submission in order to be able to send the submission to my authors to say I had submitted, but knowing full well I would never be called upon to actually pick up a rather tasteless award. And then in writing it, I thought, how do I measure my success as a tiny publisher, not just a small one, a tiny publisher, and concluded that the most important thing was that the authors I published wanted to be published by me again. That was a measure. And I took a bit of a risk, and I said 100% success. And the authors all come back and said, yes. I'm very pleased. And indeed, it's true. But, most of the authors, they've written another book, they come and talk to me about it. I get offered it without any contractual obligation on them whatsoever, just because they liked the process. Some liked it better than others, obviously. But that was, so you asked, what have I enjoyed most? I think it was hearing that these authors wanted to come back for more.
So it is about them getting to know you and you getting to know them and doing a good job.
I think doing a good job, but also communicating. Telling them good news and bad news. You've made a cock up, telling them. And then they're on your side and I'm on their side. I mean, that also goes down to back to the contractual terms. I pay them 25% royalty on all the income I receive. We are on the same side. We both want income to be as much as possible.
Right.
And it makes it collaborative.
As opposed to exploitative, obviously.
Exploitative in either direction.
Yeah.
The authors who get $1 million advances which don't earn are exploiting those who don't get advances. I would argue there's cross-subsidy going on. In case there is no cross-subsidy, everyone gets the same.
Very good. Very good, honest communication.
Yeah.
Thank you for laying it out for me today, Richard.
Pleasure, Nigel. I hope I don't get into trouble for anything I've said, but probably will. I'm used to it. As trouble as our Prime Minister is in, thank goodness.
No.
God.
You weren't at that party, were you?
I certainly not. It's I saw somewhere that at last he can really describe himself as a party leader.
So what's your website address, Richard?
It's menschpublishing.com.
Very good. Thanks again.
Okay. My pleasure. All right.
We're good. We're good to go.
Good. All right. Take care, Nigel. Have a great day.
And to you, Richard.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye-bye.